Welcome back, everybody. Today we want to have a look at fricatives. That is not something to eat. No, fricatives are a group of sounds in English. There are 9 fricatives in English. Let's have a look at them. The first pair are f and v. And the only difference here really is that f is unvoiced, no vibration from your vocal cords, and v is voiced. Next up we have th. That is the th sound, unvoiced, and the voiced counterpart, the. Both of them always represented by th. Next up we have s, also unvoiced, and z, very clearly voiced. S, no vibration, but z, very clear vibration from your vocal cords. Then we have sh and z, again unvoiced and voiced. So far they were all in pairs of unvoiced, voiced. The last fricative does not really have a partner. It's the unvoiced fricative. For example, in hello, right here, formed in your throat, and it's unvoiced. Now, it's really important to learn about these 9 fricatives and how to pronounce them properly, because some of these might not exist in your first language. I know, for example, and the do not exist in German. Now, for a German learner, they might be new, they might be a little bit difficult, and there is the danger that those learners will substitute them with a sound that they have in their own first language, for example, s or d. So instead of saying the, they say s or d, but those are not correct. And sometimes that can lead to confusion for the listener, so it's important to learn them correctly. How are fricatives formed? Now, if you watched my other video on plosives, you know that plosives are formed in a very special way, and it's very different to how fricatives are formed. Fricatives are formed because, first of all, 2 articulators come very close together and they form a little small gap in the vocal tract, but not a full closure. That's very different to plosives, where there is full closure. So here they just come together, they form a small gap, it becomes very narrow, and this small gap, that as the air pushes through the small gap, it generates audible friction, because this airflow is hampered. It can't just flow through as before. And that is what makes the sound, and that is what we can hear. So for example, there is a small gap here formed with my teeth and my lips. Now if I were to close it completely, you can't hear anything. If I open my mouth a lot, you can't hear anything either. So I have airflow and it's restricted a little bit, and that is really what you can hear. I sometimes draw the comparison between the wind outside our window, and when we have the window open just a tiny little bit, we can hear the noise from the wind pressing through this little gap. And that is pretty much like fricatives as well. They are formed in the same way. So where are fricatives formed? They have different places where they're formed, and that is also why they all sound different from one another. It's not just the difference between voiced and unvoiced, the place of articulation is also different. So our first pair was f and v, and we say that those 2 sounds are labiodental. And what does that mean? So labio sounds a little bit like the word lip, And dental makes us think of the dentist and teeth. And so that gives you a little hint. And really they're formed by the top teeth, our top teeth, touching our bottom lip. You can actually see that when you look in the mirror or you look at me. And another interesting fact is also that fricatives can be formed for as long as we have breath. So we can have a really long continuous sound with them. Etc. for all of them, of course. And again, that is very different to a lot of the other sounds that we have. So plosives, p and b, well, you cannot hold them. It's not possible. But it is possible with fricatives. So f and v, labiodental sounds. Let's have a look at the next pair. The next pair is th and the. And remember, those are the two sounds that are always represented by TH spelling in English. If you want to learn more about them, I have an entire video dedicated only to those two sounds, and I will link to it in the description box below. So let's have a look how they formed. So we call these dental sounds, and that is really because you can see the tongue is between our teeth. The. And I would encourage you, if you find those sounds a little bit difficult and you don't have them in your first language, practice that a little bit, maybe even in front of a mirror. Because maybe this movement is unusual for you and for your tongue. And remember, the tongue is a muscle. And just like any muscle, when we go to the gym at the start, we're a little bit slow, things are difficult, maybe we ache. But with more practice, we become stronger and quicker and more comfortable with the new movements. And the same is true for your tongue. It will also become faster and more comfortable with the movement. So just practice those a few times. The. Very good. Let's have a look at the next pair. Next up, we have s and z. And we need quite a lot of strength for the last one because it's a voiced sound, z. And these we call alveolar. Now, alveolar because we form them with our tongue near the alveolar ridge. You probably wonder where that is in our mouth. You've probably never heard of this ridge. Never knew that you had a ridge like that in your mouth, I'm sure. So the alveolar ridge is really that little bump behind your top teeth. So you've got your top teeth, and just behind there is a little ridge, and that is the alveolar ridge. So s, z, our tongue forms a little gap just near that alveolar ridge. So it doesn't really touch it, there's no closure, it just comes very close and forms a little gap through which the air flows and creates these two fricative sounds, s and z. Let's have a look at the next pair, sh and zh. Now those are very close to s and z, just a little bit further back. Sh and zh. Our tongue moves a little bit back, and we call this place post. Post means after, of course. Post alveolar. And that is really that the tongue is just behind this alveolar ridge. So remember, we first had s and z, and then sh, just a little bit further back. Sh and zh. And we need quite a lot of effort, I think, for zh. This is an unusual sound in English, that voiced zh sound, that voiced post-alveolar sound. Now, our last fricative sound did not have a partner, it was all alone. It's an unvoiced sound. And that we call a glottal sound because it is formed in the throat. As in, hello, how are you? Very soft, very breathy, and not very harsh. Let's have a look at the typical spelling. First of all, of the sound f. The typical spelling of f is usually F, double F, PH, and sometimes even GH. Let's have a look at these example words. We have flat, safe, difficult, photo, nephew, laugh, and enough. And laugh and enough are probably the strangest in terms of spelling, because a GH you would not necessarily think form a f sound, but they do. So laugh and enough, both of those have a f for GH. Let's have a look at the typical spelling for the. It's really easy. It's always the letter V, as in very, over, visit. Just a little tip for Spanish speakers: make sure your the does not sound like a b. That is a very different sound in English. The is a fricative, but b is a plosive, and we have a clear distinction between the two sounds. And for example, the word very, as you can see here on my slide, very is not the same as the word berry, like strawberry. Those are two different sounds, two different words, and they have a very different meaning. Next up, we have the spelling for th, our unvoiced TH sound. And here really it's easy. It's always represented through TH spelling. For example, in the words think, tooth, and healthy. Now, the counterpart was the voiced TH sound, and again, always represented through the letters TH. And you've got a couple of example words here: the, that, mother, and with. Let's have a look at the spelling for s, our unvoiced fricative s. And here we have a couple of different spelling patterns. We could have S, double S, CE, CI, or SC. For example, in the words stop, bus, fast, message, miss, but also words like place, circle, and science. Here we've got it twice at the start and the end. Science. Let's have a look at the typical spelling for Z. Here we usually have a Z or S letter. For example, zero, zebra, zoo, lazy, freezing. Or also easy, has, lose. So you've got Z or S. Here is the typical spelling for sh, sh, s, ch, or ti plus a vowel sound. For example, in the words show, shoe, wash, fashion, sure, sugar, machine, or in the last line with ti plus vowel sound, we have information, patient, and direction. And there are many words in English that end in tion, and the pronunciation is shun, with a sh fricative, unvoiced, shun. Let's have a look at the next sound. Here we have zh. Now, this is always spelled with an S. It's quite an unusual sound in English. There are some words, but not many. For example, television, decision, confusion, usually, pleasure. I know you probably think, oh, but they are very common words. I know, but there are not many words that have this sound, although I'm sure you know these ones, so they all have a zh sound. And then the typical spelling for h is H or WH, as in hello, house, help, perhaps, but also who, whose, and whole. All of those have a h sound. Now we do have minimal pairs for some of these sounds. Remember, minimal pairs are a pair of words where everything is exactly the same, all the sounds are the same apart from one sound in the same position. That is the only difference, but the two words have a very different meaning. And here are some minimal pairs for s and sh first. So let's have a look at these minimal pairs. We have see, but she, self, but shelf, sour, but shower, save, but shave, sort, but short. So you can see everything is the same. I know the spelling is different, but if I were to transcribe them, you could see that the sounds are exactly the same in these words, and the only difference is the first sound. The first column of words on the left all have a s, whereas the other words on the right all have a sh to start with. But they are very different words, and they all have a different meaning to one another. Let's have a look at some more minimal pairs, this time for s and th. Sink, but think. Sing, but thing. Sick, but thick. Sum, but thumb. Mouse, but mouth. If you find those difficult to say or even to hear the difference, I would encourage you to go back and watch this part again and repeat the words with me. Our last group of minimal pairs are minimal pairs for the sound s and z. Let's say them together. Face versus phase. Pace, but pays. Price, but prize. Niece, but knees. Ice, but eyes. Again, here the difference is very small. It's really the unvoiced s and the voiced partner z. Like I said, if you need to listen again, just go back in the video and repeat this exercise.